Well, hello everyone. Happy Blurs Day. Welcome to the bi-weekly webinar series we call Prep Matters Town Hall. Today we're going to dig into the Common App, which debuted for the class of 2021 on Saturday. Actually, I think it was Friday at like 11
Friday
p.m.
night. Yep.
Was it? Yeah, but they opened it up a little early. But August 1st is the annual day they open up for the rising seniors, and so we're going to take you through that today. My name is Jeff Knox. I'm the Educational Planning Director at Prep Matters. You can reach me at my email on the screen, and I'm joined tonight by my colleague Katie.
And I'm one of the educational counselors here at Prep Matters, and my email is also on the screen.
So please reach out to us after this webinar if you have any questions that you didn't get a chance to ask in the question feature of this Zoom webinar. Feel free to ask what's on your mind. We will attempt to answer what comes our way. And then Katie will talk about her favorite feature of the question and answer box.
My favorite feature of the question and answer box, in fact, the favorite thing I have learned during quarantine is that when someone puts a question in that you also want to know the answer to, you can upvote it with a little like sign so we can see that that's an important question and make sure that we get to it.
So please do, because it probably feels good when your question is upvoted by a lot of people. It's like when you have a student in the classroom and you encourage that student, well, raise your hand, ask the question, because there's probably someone else who has that exact same question in the classroom. So please throw some questions in the Q&A box. So let's move onward and talk a little bit about the history of the Common App, just because it's interesting. It's been around for a long time. If there are any parents who are joining us today, maybe you used the Common App. It was probably paper form. I might be wrong, but it was on paper for a while until I
It was
think
paper when I went to college.
until the early 2000s. I think they started moving online, but it's been around. It was started by a group of universities, 15 universities, as a convenience. They got together and said, why do we all have to have different applications asking essentially the same thing? And it is ballooned to now an application platform only online with 900, give or take, 900 universities and colleges across the land, all over the world. And what it's done is provide access to students who otherwise might not know about certain colleges that are members on the Common App, or wouldn't be able to just have the ability to wrap their arms around all of the stuff that it takes to apply to a number of colleges and universities. So there's a great power in the Common App and its convenience and its accessibility, but it's also limiting, Katie, right? Like it's not that complicated. It's not that robust in terms of expressing a student's identity.
I think one of the things that is important for me to think about when I'm working with students is that it feels so convenient that you do want to make sure that you look very intentionally and very carefully at every piece of it so that you can see what the limitations are. What have you shared? What do you still need to make sure you share in a different place? It feels just like, oh great, click, and I'm applying to college. And I think that is a little bit of a false sense of security.
That's right. You'll hear us talk about that tonight. I usually say optimizing each component of the application, or zooming out and looking at the big picture and asking yourself, is every piece of my background, my academic experience, what I want admissions to know, is it represented somewhere? And if it's not, can I delegate that responsibility to a piece of the Common App? There are some very specific components of the Common App that have one clear role, and then there are other areas of the Common App where there's some flexibility in how you use that space. And so we like to tell our students to think in those terms. And if you've been to our webinars before, then you'll recognize this table, and these are the components that you will find expressed somewhere on the Common App if it's a component that's relevant to you, and if it's a component that the college actually asks for. Because as you already know, not every college needs every single piece of that's listed here in this table of factors in admissions decisions, which is brought to us by NACAC, the National Association of College Admission Counseling. There are some schools that simply don't look at essays. There are some schools that are test optional, more that exist today than ever before.
More every day.
More every day. We're watching them come through. And so this is not the formula for college admissions for every school in the country, but it gives you a sense of the factors that could be out there. And your job is to do your research and get an understanding of what factors are important for the particular schools that you're applying to. When we go over this table in various webinars, we're usually talking about one of these things and we highlight one of these things. But today, we're talking about an application package. And I use that word intentionally. I always think in terms of like an application package. Because what can happen is a student or a parent will perseverate over one thing, like the essay or the score. And in my experience in admissions, but also talking with a lot of admissions people, Katie and I have talked with now more than 100 admissions officers throughout the country in the last 6 months. They never make a decision based on only one factor. It's a combination of factors that I like to refer to as a package. Any other points on this screen, Katie?
No, what I like about the Common App is that it does put all of this somewhere. It gives you some space to make sure that you're touching on all the different pieces, so that you can have a sense of your package, so that you can, I often like to say you want to maximize the real estate of your application package so that you know that everything goes somewhere and you can make sure that you use every opportunity to introduce yourself to the team. And just like my favorite part of Zoom is the upvoting, this chart is Jeff's favorite part of every webinar we do.
I do appreciate the chart. And just one other note, it's 100%, it is 100% of colleges who are members of the Common App place considerable importance on the Common App. There are schools that do not use the Common App, so it's just be mindful. University of Maryland is one of them. Where they use the Coalition application platform, and there are other school-specific application platforms. There's the UCAS, which is the application platform for many schools in the United Kingdom. And so just to throw that out there, that it's possible that you will need more than just the Common App. It's also possible that you have a college list that doesn't need the Common App at all, though that's unlikely just given the number of schools who...
Trickier. It's harder to do that.
So moving forward, one thing that Katie and I like to talk about also, just to keep things in perspective, is that your aim here as an applicant is, yes, to be thorough, we'll talk about that, to be exacting, to be precise and accurate, but frankly, admissions officers are not going to pore over your application or essay for an hour and a half in the way that you might, or you might do with Katie, or your parents might, or a trusted teacher might look at it. You should do that heavy lifting. You should do that work. But your goal here is to build an impression. Because an admissions officer, as they're looking through an application, they've done this before. They kind of know what they're looking for. They've seen some things before. And they might spend something like 5 or 7 minutes on an application before they make a decision. So the impression is something I also like to help a student understand by zooming out and asking the student, having the student ask me, asking ourselves, what is the impression that we've built here? And you do that by taking every component of the application and looking at it independently, but also looking at it as a whole. And one of the just to drive home the point, one of the chapters, I think it's the introductory chapter of a book called Blink by a very well-known author named Malcolm Gladwell, hits on this point of first impression, or just kind of an expert first impression. And Katie will fill in some of the more precise language about this story, but I'll give it a shot. There was this ancient Greek statue known as...
We're going to call it a core.
Okay, so it has a name, yep. And someone discovered it. And understandably, one of the questions was, is this authentic or is this a fraud? Because apparently in ancient Greek statue land, fraudulent work can happen, and that's troublesome. So whoever discovered this ancient Greek statue went to the people who can do the chemical analyses and the scientific tests to really make sure, is the patina precisely what it should be on this the surface of this statue is the width between the braids of the hair or whatever, what we've seen in other statues. And through rigorous scientific analysis, all of the evidence pointed to, yes, indeed, this is authentic. This is a real, newly discovered ancient Greek statue. But when experts were brought in, not to do scientific tests, but just to walk in and look at it, they came into the room, they saw this piece, and they went, there's something off. I don't know what. I see the scientific evidence, but it doesn't look right. Well, lo and behold, after more scientific testing and more analysis of various kinds, it indeed was a highly sophisticated, fraudulent piece. And the science was wrong, the numbers were wrong, the numbers were misleading, the computer was wrong, but the experts who have just been immersed in ancient Greek statues for decades, they just got it right based on the sense. And when I read that chapter, I immediately thought about the work of admissions officers. And I brought this up to admissions officers, and they've kind of nod their head and feel like it relates to their work, because they kind of, for better or worse, do the same thing. And so through your careful and rigorous and thorough work, you'll be able to create the kind of impression you want. And it's also a good idea to have someone to help you, right? And a trusted advisor like your college counselor at your school, or another adult that you want insight from through this process, just to make sure that the impression that you think you're conveying is actually getting its way to the application reader.
And I think the really important thing about that is admissions officers are very good at knowing who is successful at their school. Universities understand their mission, their ethos. They know what their student life is like. And so when they take that moment to get that impression, it's really because they know who they are best set up to serve, best able to create a college environment that helps students to succeed. And so your job is not to try and guess what they are looking for, but to give your every space you have in your application to get as deep and authentic about who you are. What they did with this course was fake the scientific details. The fraudulent model knew what they were looking for in the Stone Age, what they were looking for in the depth. And so they were able to create what they thought the curators were looking for, and instead what the curators were looking for was authenticity. And so if you create the most authentic application you can create, then the schools where you will be most successful are the ones for whom that will speak.
Yeah, if I get asked the question, what's the secret to college admissions? What's the strategy? Or the word I always use is authenticity. I mean, that really is what stands out among the piles of applications. So it sounds hokey, it sounds trite, but stay true to thine own self, and really you can't go wrong there. So moving forward, we are actually going to leave this PowerPoint slide and take you to a real live Common Application account. So if you'll just bear with me for a second, I'm going to bring my Common App to the screen. And I'm going to start us on the sign-in page, just in case you haven't actually started your account. You are likely a first-year student. That's what you want to pick, and you're the class of 2021, or you're a rising senior. I'll ask you that information. It'll ask you for a few simple, contact pieces of information about your contact information, and then off you go. And then you'll get your own login username, which is your email address. One point about your email address is that for some schools, it's smart to use the email address that your school uses if they have another electronic digital platform for sending transcripts and letters of recommendation. Naudiance is a really common one. There are others like Score and other things like that. So just make sure that you either get that confirmed by your school, that indeed you do need to use the same email address as what your school has, because those platforms need to talk to each other, or maybe that's not the case, because what's nice, if you're allowed to use any email you want, some students like to create a brand new email address just for this process, because once you create a Common App, you are going to get even more email than you have already been getting because of having signed up for an ACT or an SAT or an AP or something like that. And so it's a nice way of siloing all of that communication into one email address. And it only works if you are willing to actually check that email address, because those email communications can be really important sometimes, not just because of the demonstrated interest component, which we've talked about in these webinars a lot, that they can check whether you opened the email, see if you clicked on the link in the email, see even how long you've stayed on the page that it directed you to. But sometimes, and there have been some really interesting examples, that a school will email you something, a call to action. You need to take action that will impact directly whether you move forward in their admissions process or not. You could get an email that says, hey, we got your application. In order for us to continue, you need to do these things. It might be as simple as filling out a little form, but missing an email like that can create confusion when you get a note later, or maybe you hear nothing back, or a note later that says, yeah, I know you weren't admitted. We never got that response via email. It's rare, but it's happened. So stay on top of that email. I'm off. I'm done preaching, but it's important.
And what's not rare is just about every school that you apply to through the Common App will immediately send you an email asking you to create a school portal. And that portal is where you will hear your admissions decision. So you certainly want to get those emails. And so whatever email you use in the Common App is a pretty important thing to keep track of. And I fully second Jeff's suggestion that if you have an option of creating a college-only email account, do it, because it keeps it all in one place, and then you can still get the emails that you need from your calculus teacher about homework.
The password is super secure. You have to have an uppercase, a lowercase, a number, and a special character, and it has to be at least 10 characters long. So if you are used to using your same old password that doesn't fit those criteria, you will need to adapt and pick a new password. And please don't rely on your internet browser's ability to remember your password so that you don't have to. It's just, from experience, I know it's such a headache, because it's going to be a password you don't remember. You're going to have to you do the forgot password thing over and over and over again. So pick something you'll be able to remember. Also write it down, keep it in a safe place. Just do that. Don't rely only on that feature in your internet browser. So let's go into My Common App. And when you open it up, you will see these tabs at the top. Now, if you're just starting, the dashboard will be clear. You won't have schools listed for you because you have not chosen them yet. And the way that you can choose them is by running over to the College Search tab. And here is where you will find the nearly 900 options that exist. And I don't know if it's actually more than 900. Once I added these schools, I don't know if it actually took those out of the results that are available, but I'm just curious. I'm just thinking out loud out of curiosity. But you can partially type in any school here, and then things will, or any phrase or partial phrase, and the schools that match that will pop up. And then you can add the school that you want to add. I've already added GW, and it'll pop up under not only your dashboard, but your My Colleges tab, which I'm just letting my internet, there we go. And this My Colleges tab is very important and an often accidentally overlooked piece of the application process. We will talk about this later, but these little sections here are the school-specific portion of the application. This is not just a list of information. It does give you good information, but the questions here and the little sections here, those two need to be submitted in addition to this tab, which is the actual Common Application. So you're in the Common App, but the actual app is right here. And you can see you've got these sections that you're responsible for filling out. And we're going to just take you through these sections. We're not going to go through everything because you don't need me or Katie to talk about what a middle name is. But we're just
that is, however, Jeff's middle name. It's a nice one.
Yes. So if you want to email me afterwards, you can say, "Dear Jeffrey Ryan Knox," and I'll happily respond. My nickname growing up indeed was Bunky. Some of this information is actually true about me. Some of it is totally fake. So yeah, but those parts are true. And so as you go through, we'll talk about the profile section first. And this section is one of the easiest. This is where it's just asking you for things like your middle name, your gender. You can see that throughout the application, you get opportunities to put more context. And you'll see these optional kind of write-in boxes so that if the options that you're presented with don't exactly fit what you want to convey, you get that opportunity to fill out a little bit more information. We've got your address, contact details like your phone number, which you already fill in when you sign up. But let's go over to demographics because usually we get a lot of questions about this because this is where for some students it feels like it's prying a little bit, and that's why all of this is optional. You could go through this entire demographics section and fill out nothing, and you could still submit the application. But generally speaking, unless you have a very strong reason or preference to not fill something out, my automatic answer is if you know what the answer is, you should put it in here. And what I see a lot of students do is they say, they probably don't care about my mother's middle initial, or why would they need to know what my religion is? It's none of their business. And if you really, really feel strongly about that, more power to you, leave it blank. But if you have an answer, back to that idea of building an impression, my thought is that one of the impressions I would want you to build is that you are thorough, that you take the time to fill things out completely. You don't cut corners, you don't skip over things. So really, if you're hearing this, I mean, I want you to sit down and do your best to answer. I'm going to just talk about the religious preferences. Katie, if you and your dog want to help us out with the ethnicity and race.
We can talk a little bit about ethnicity, sure.
Great. So for religious preferences, there are a lot of options here, and you can kind of find what works for you. If yours isn't listed, or if you want to provide more context, perhaps you were raised in a home with a mother who practices Judaism and a father who is a Catholic, you can put other and actually specify that here. Most students would put none for armed forces, but if you did serve or are serving, then of course you could answer that. And then we get these questions about race and ethnicity.
So what I get a lot of questions from students about race and ethnicity, particularly because it's often a little bit of a touchy question, specifically in college admissions, right? There's a lot of conversation around the role that these pieces of information play in your college admissions. And again, as Jeff said earlier, I think the question is, if you know the answer, and in this case, really what you want to ask yourself is, how do I identify? Do I identify in this way? And that's something I want to share. We're always coming back to, how do I most authentically show who I am? And part of it is that at 17, we're probably a little bit still figuring out who I am. And so it might take some time to think it through. The first question they ask you, as you can see, is, are you Hispanic or Latinx? And so that is a separate question from the rest of your questions of race and ethnicity. If you say no, then that's a straight up no. If you say yes, it gives you some additional options to specify where your Hispanic or Latinx background might come from. And as above, and as several times throughout the Common App, you'll see if you choose other, it then pops up another box for you to share a piece of your background in whatever way is most meaningful to you. And then separate from that question, that is one question that many forms, and the Common App is one of them, will ask you to identify. But then separate from that, there is a broader question of just these 5 choices. Now, these 5 choices often feel a little bit limiting to some students, but you'll see again, as you open up some of them, Jeff is doing a nice job of showing us here, it pops up some other options. So if I select that I am Asian, it gives me several options to identify where my Asian background comes from. So they're trying as much as they can to simplify the form, but also give you space to explain some of the different pieces that go into your background, since the vast majority of us have many different parts of our identity that we might want to share in our application.
And I think that's a great way of thinking about it is how do you identify authentically? And then what do you want to convey? And then on the other kind of end of that thought process is like, well, what is fair for me to select? And what I tend to tell students if they're really kind of struggling is look at the U.S. Census Bureau definitions of these these races, and if that definition is true to you and you want to convey this to colleges and it matches you, then go for it. They're not going to call you or your counselor and say, now, are they or aren't they what they said? They're going to take your word for it. But if I've worked with students, for example, who do not at all look like some of the ethnicity that they indeed share, and they're trying to figure out whether it is fair for them to select that or not. I point them to the U.S. Census Bureau definitions. So moving forward in this profile section, we're going to hover on language. We're skipping over the things that we think are just kind of straightforward, because one thing that I think students just don't realize is that if you've studied a language in your high school years, the question here isn't are you fluent, are you proficient? And if you are, ending with AP Spanish junior or senior year, one would hope that you are proficient. And the way I define proficiency is, can you talk about the weather? Can you order some food at a restaurant comfortably? Can you have some small talk enough that you would be comfortable and not struggling? And if that's the case for whatever you're studying in school, then feel free to answer and include that, and then click the abilities that you have that are appropriate.
This is one that I think students miss a lot. They don't realize that that is part of what they are asking, but I think it's really valuable.
Yeah, and let's say that you only had 2 years of Spanish, and you're like, I did Spanish 2 in ninth grade, and I stopped after that, and I really don't know a lick of Spanish. Then don't put it in there, right?
Right.
Again, it goes back to that authenticity. But I don't want you to shortchange yourself by not including something like that. So we're going to move away from the profile section and move into family. And the family section asks for a lot of detail about your parents. I mean, some of this stuff, even I'm just like, really? They need to know the year that my
The year
parents were
of divorce.
divorced? Like, what could that possibly help them do? And I've never really got an answer for that. But in the spirit of being thorough, you fill out everything. And parents, if you're listening, one, I hope you enjoyed the ABBA music in the beginning of this webinar. That was deliberately chosen because
Jeff and I certainly did.
we love ABBA. And maybe there are some students there that appreciate ABBA too, and I hope there are. But two, this is the only section that I feel like I can say you have permission to fill out for your child. Everything else, really, in the spirit of your child owning this process and taking responsibility, it should be their burden, their endeavor. And of course, if you want to help by giving them access to someone who can check it after they've done the work, or even if you have the kind of relationship where your child wants you to be the one to check it, fine. But in terms of actually filling it out for them, this is the section where I really think it's okay because it's about you. What I don't want students to do is wing it and just say, oh yeah, I think my mom graduated from a college somewhere. Let me just
Yeah.
throw something in there. My favorite example is when I had a student years ago. Her father's a lawyer, and she just didn't know what a lawyer's degree was called. She just thought it was an associate's degree. And so she selected that. And I was able to look at it and just say, like, I thought your dad was a lawyer. He is. Well, what is this? Did you ask him? No, I just put it in there. And we don't want to do that. So make sure that your parents get a chance to explain their full background, because this section is actually really important to colleges. They do want to know the background of your parents because it provides the context for your upbringing. In this section, it'll also ask you about siblings. And so same deal there. Make sure you get the correct information. Moving on to the education section, this is where you put information about your high school. You ask some simple questions about whether it was boarding and whether you will graduate and when. If you had a non-traditional kind of high school path, maybe you didn't do just the straight 3 years at this point, freshman, sophomore, junior year at one institution, maybe you're graduating early or whatever, then you can click these here. And if you do, and this is one of many examples, an entire new text box will open up. This is not just like an other write-in text, like they're actually looking for content here. And you have up to 250 words to explain why you graduated early or why you graduated late or whatever. So I wanted to bring that up in this section because it shows up in this section, but I also wanted to bring it up because leaving this work to the last minute can be uh, really risky if you didn't look through these questions until the night before the deadline or the night before the day you hope to press submit, and you click something, and all of a sudden you see you have a whole new statement you have to write. Well, you're not going to be very happy about that. So go through these questions early. You don't have to do it perfectly, but really kind of dig through these now since you're here, and then you can kind of see what kind of, what they're called smart questions, what kind of smart questions pop up. Katie, why would we use other secondary high schools or the college and universities tab?
If you have been to more than one.
Yeah, this one.
So the school that you are listing at the top is the school from which you are applying. So when you start out, you say, I attend this school, and that's the school that will be sending you my transcripts. That's the school that you will see my current teachers at. But maybe I came here as a junior. Maybe I came here as a sophomore. And so you want to make sure you list all of your secondary schools. And it's very important because colleges are looking very closely at what your transcript looks like and where your grades are, and there might be some confusion on that at your current school depending on what their policy is. So you will want to have transcripts from all of the schools. So you want to make sure colleges know every place you've been on your high school journey. And again, it gives you some options to talk about why you changed schools. Was there a reason you weren't in the same school for all of high school? Did you move? Was the school not a good fit? Were you asked to leave? What might be the circumstances surrounding that change? Because again, they're really trying to get a sense of who you are, and all of this gives them some context for that. So maybe I transferred to my school as a senior, which means my letters of recommendation maybe are from my former school. So they'd want to know why I'm getting letters from a school, from a teacher who doesn't work at my school. There's a lot of reasons why you want to make sure that they understand your full context.
Yeah, the way I like to put it is we don't want them to have to make assumptions when you can give them the full context. So every opportunity that you have to answer questions that they might automatically have, you take it. And so this is an example where you can control the narrative here and make sure that they understand whatever part of your story you're talking about in the way that you hope they understand it. For colleges and universities, not this is if you have done a summer program at a university, if your school offers dual enrollment, which means you're getting college credit and high school credit at the same time while you're in high school, or maybe you did take a college class and earned actual credit. But I don't want you to overlook this because when you get to this page, it just says, "Have you ever taken coursework?" And if you did a summer program for 2.5 weeks, you might look at this and say, "Oh, I didn't do coursework at a college. It was just a summer program." But if you actually fill it out, you see that summer program is an option. And so, again, in the spirit of being thorough, click around and just kind of don't assume that something isn't relevant to you. Play around with it and just see what pops up. And then if you dig around, you might realize, okay, it's not relevant to me.
And you want to be specific, particularly about those summer programs, because you don't want colleges to think you are applying as a transfer student with college credit already under your belt when you are applying as a first-year student.
Right. The grades section, this is interesting because that sounds like a really important section. And the only thing that is required on this page, this little section, is your graduating class size. And it says approximate, so I guess because they are allowing it to be approximate, you could approximate the number. But I also think it doesn't take too much effort to email your college counselor at school or your guidance counselor at school and say, "Hey, how many kids are in my class?" and get the real number. Everything else is optional because everything else isn't available at every school. There are schools that do not offer a GPA. There are a lot of schools that don't dabble in ranking at all. And so if your school doesn't do these things, then you will not do these things on your application. We're not going to just randomly calculate a GPA, not fabricate, but just try to do our best to approximate a GPA. The only information that should be on this section should be information that's already on your transcripts. So that is the
or given to you by your college counselor.
Right. The transcript is the document that includes all your grades from high school, not just a report card. And then yes, if it's not your transcript, but your counselor at your school has said, we want you to put this in here like this, well, that is official. That's the same as it being on transcript. They ask for senior year courses. So if there are any students who are thinking, oh, junior year is the most important, and after that, they don't really care, that is not true. The opposite is true. Senior year, in my opinion, is even more important than junior year. Not just your performance, which is important, but the kinds of classes you're taking. And so here, they get a sense of what you plan to take or what you're in the middle of taking. You won't be sending grades here. You might be sending them in this little section over here, which we'll talk about later. But if you're applying early to a school, whether they require the first marking period or not, you want to be in a position to want to share the first marking period voluntarily. And then every school you apply to, unless you are admitted early decision to a school, meaning you know where you're going and you're bound to go there before the end of the calendar year, or you've just applied early to a school and you got in and you know it's your number one choice and you've signed on the dotted line. But every school that you've applied to and you're waiting till the spring to kind of see how things turn out, they will all require your first semester or first trimester, whatever that first big marking period is, before they notify you of admission.
And this is actually, I think, even more critical this year. We've heard many colleges say that though they don't typically look at first quarter or first trimester grades, this year they are shifting their model so they will look at them because so many students were not able to have reliable grades last spring because of the pandemic. So I think in particular this year, this is a part where you want to pay a lot of attention to both in filling out the Common App appropriately and in really paying attention to your coursework for the first semester. And many schools also, I've heard admissions officers over the years notice if you are waiting till the spring, if you apply regular decision, maybe you applied early and your application was moved to the regular spot and they look at your mid-year grades and the courses you're taking in the spring, they'll notice if you've changed them. If maybe in the fall I told you I was taking 4 APs and then in the spring I'm taking a lot of those underwater basket weavings, they will notice that and wonder and maybe ask you what happened to change that decision. So you want to be very responsible and rigorous as a senior. High school's not over yet.
But this is AP underwater basket weaving.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
that's okay. Yeah, yeah.
You're a high achiever, Jeff Ryan.
The honors section is meant for academic honors only. So an example that would fit here would be maybe an award that you won for being a student athlete with a high GPA, because that high GPA is an academic component of the award. Getting a varsity letter is not an honors for this academic achievement section. So just be clear there. You get up to 5 spots. And so if you have 5 honors, great. Most of the students I work with have only a couple, if any. So don't feel bad if you're like, my school doesn't give honors. I don't have any honors to. That's not a bad thing. That's a really normal thing. And if you have kind of a clump of honors that are essentially all the same, but just a little bit different, like honor societies, like National Honor Society, National Spanish Honor Society, National English Honor Society, if you needed the space, you could also combine those because colleges are well aware of what those honor societies are.
And I think that happens a lot with the Scholar Athlete Awards.
Yes.
Many students who receive them several seasons in a row, this is a place where you can capture that.
Or like honor roll, some students will accidentally put honor roll 5 times in 5 different spaces, but really you would just put it here and then just click the grades where you when you earned them. If you work with a community-based organization, this is where you would fill out information about that CBO. And then they do ask about future plans, and I don't want anyone to freak out, but in terms of career interest, they have a perfectly specific and vague categories at the same time. So we've got things like school counselor, but then I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but sometimes I'll have a student who says, well, where's this? I'm like, why wouldn't they have that? It seems like a more prominent career interest than some of these others. So if you don't see what you want, you can put other and then type in what you want. If you really have no clue, I don't want you to feel bad about putting undecided. That's okay. They won't hold it against you. But generally speaking, if you have a sense of direction, I encourage students to put some kind of sense of direction, especially if it's supported by the application. If you're in DECA and Future Business Leaders of America and you started your own entrepreneurial endeavor, then go ahead and put business. And they're not going, unless you're applying to a business school, they're not going to shackle you to business classes the first day you get there. And for the degree, I tend to ask students to put, because I'm aspirational, one degree higher than what they know they are going to earn. So we know you're going to earn a bachelor's, and because that's the undergraduate degree, unless you know for a fact there's no way that you will continue education beyond the undergraduate years, I tend to tell students to be aspirational and select master's or higher. They also offer graduate school specific degrees. So onward to the testing section. And so this will be interesting this year. We're not going to poke around this as much, but really just kind of talk about how you will send your standardized testing scores, if at all, because as you know, so many schools for the class of 2021 are test optional for obvious reasons. But this is where you self-report scores. And it was only a few years ago that schools started saying, you know what, you can just tell us what your scores are, we'll trust you, and then if you admit you, then you send them, and you better not have lied. Why did they do that, Katie?
Because it's expensive to send score reports. It costs a lot of money. If you're applying to 8 or 10 or 12 or more than that, although I don't recommend applying to more than that. If you have more than 12 schools on your list, call me. But if you're applying to a number of schools and each score report costs between $12 and $25, at $12 and $20, it ends up adding up, and colleges are trying very hard to make sure that more students have more access to their applications. I've actually specifically heard several students, several admissions teams recently say, especially with AP scores, please save yourself those dollars. Just send them to us when you enroll. Tell us about them in the Common App. Then they're all in one place. I can look at the testing page of your application as I read it, and you don't have to pay for each individual score report.
Just be careful because not every school allows for self-reporting. Many do, but in this standardized testing policy webpage of the admissions site on their website, they should tell you really clearly whether they're okay with self-reporting or if they require an official report, meaning you will have to send them, pay to have them sent.
And this isn't so much about the Common App, but to follow up on that, some schools require that you send the official report and require that it be there by the deadline. Right. And so you want to make sure you're really paying attention to all of those different pieces as your deadlines roll around, because if you're still working on your application and getting ready to submit it a couple days before the deadline, you might have forgotten, oh, I need to go check my ACT or my SAT account and also request that those scores be sent in time. And it would be a shame, it is a shame every year when I see it happen, to make sure your application gets in on time and then to have the decision be delayed because of your SAT scores.
When you put in your test scores, you are allowed to report only the scores you wish to report. You are not compelled to report every single test. You actually can't. They only want the highest sections for however many ACTs or SATs you've taken. So this is the part of the application where you might see more changes in between submissions than other sections. For example, if you're applying test optional to one school and not test optional to another, you would put in the test information, submit it to the school who you want to see your scores, then go back in, take it out, and then submit it to the school you're applying to test optional. And you can do that with any section of this application. I don't recommend it because I don't think it's necessary to do that for many, the majority of these sections. But for that,
it's also very easy to make mistakes.
Yeah, very easy. Yeah, that's exactly right. But that would be an appropriate thing to do here.
Because just to clarify, Jeff, we fill out the Common App. That's that center tab. We fill out the Common App once, and it goes to all the schools. But for each of your schools, you not only fill out the application, but you submit them individually. So you
Right.
do have that flexibility with something like test optional.
The next two sections are the ones that probably take the most thinking, the most work, the most care. The activity section, which allows you to list 10 activities or fewer, no more. And so either you're going to use what's called the additional information section as a spillover if you have more than 10, or the school might allow you to upload a resume. We'll see that in a second. Or you can do some fancy combining. Maybe you're on two soccer teams, a club team and your school team. Well, you could probably smush those together into one line on here. It'll ask you for the activity type, and here you've got a whole bunch of types listed. If you don't see what you want, you've always got other here. And then they have teased out a section so you can describe your position and your leadership, or your leadership role, or both. The name of the organization. Note that this part is required. That red asterisk means it's required. You cannot submit without it. Here, not required, but you probably have an organization name unless it's something like a hobby or a family responsibility, like you have to drive your younger sibling to and from school or something like that. And then this is where you get the description. There are a lot of different ways to describe the activities. There are students who like to use full sentences and even a little bit of like colorful language and treat it like a one sentence kind of essay, which go for it if you've got the space, but it's only 150 characters. Or what allows you to put more information in is use resume speech, which is phrases, incomplete sentences separated by whatever is going to be consistent for you. I tend to use semicolons. Other people like to use periods. It doesn't really matter as long as I think it's clear to someone who doesn't need a key to unlock whatever you're doing in these activity sections. So if you're not sure if you're clear, show it to someone who hasn't seen it before and say, like, what does this mean to you? They do ask for the grades that you participate in these activities, whether it was during the school year or during school break, which I read as summer, or if you did have an activity that was only in winter break, okay, or did it span the entire calendar year? And then ballpark. Do not spend hours with a calculator trying to figure this out. Ball,
Truly ballpark. But be consistent with your ballparking.
right.
For all the activities that were all year, use the same number.
And the spirit of this question is, what was 1 week through the entire calendar year? You did this once over a week. Or what was something you do monthly or every week, or you spend 10 hours a week. But the difference between, I spend 3 hours a week doing this during the school year versus 3.5 hours a week, which you can put 0.5 if you want, that's not a big deal. So ballpark. And then I always err on the side of maybe. So if you think you might do something similar, not exactly the same, similar, I say, yeah, why not? Because you don't know. You might. And so that's a run through of the activities section. It might be a good idea for you to type this stuff outside of the application, making note of the character limits, just so you can see it in a better format, and then copying and pasting. And then even after that, this is true of the essays too, looking to make sure that the formatting didn't get messed up somehow when you copy and paste, because that's still a thing.
Still a thing. Jeff, I apologize. I was looking at the Q&A, so I might have missed it if you'd said this, but one of the questions I get a lot is what order I should put things in my activities section. And although there's not really a rule, I think it is makes the most sense to always put at the top the things that are most critical to who you are. The things you spend the most time on, or the things that you most identify with. You kind of want to lead with those, and then move down the line in that order.
The format is really going to be a block for that. They'll see it as a block. If you see the preview of your application, you kind of see what it looks like of the 10 activities kind of together. So I wouldn't worry too much about what was in 7th place and 8th place and oh my gosh. But generally speaking, like the impression should convey what was most significant or most important to you at the top.
Can I just also answer one of the questions that just popped up in the Q&A,
Please
because I
do.
think it's a one that other folks might be interested in. One of our attendees just said, for activities where a student has held multiple positions over time, for instance, started as a writer and became an editor, how do you list the position? That's a great question. And actually, the Common App this year has just expanded the space for those boxes, as Jeff was pointing out, with the activities, with the organization and the leadership. I think partly for that reason. So then you can say writer, parentheses 9. I also use semicolons a lot. Semicolon, editor, parentheses 10, 11. So you can indicate in that space where your different activities, your different positions in the activity took place.
Very good. I'm going to kind of power through the, where is it? Up here, the writing section, because we have whole seminars dedicated just to this section. There's actually one coming up on August, it's a Monday, August 16th or 17th?
17th.
17th, whatever that Monday is, at 7
Whatever the
o'clock.
Monday is.
We're going to have a college essay seminar. Please join us. You'll get an email about it, I'm
It's the
sure.
17th.
The 17th, thank you very much, 7 o'clock. But on this page, this is where you actually put your college essay, the one that goes to all the colleges to which you apply who want the essay. We'll talk about it in a little bit. This is where you pick your prompt that you're answering, knowing that topic of your choice is always available to you. And here you'll see that the schools I've listed, they require it, and we should assume that they're going to read it. These guys don't. Clemson is just not interested in writing. In Clemson, they're really kind of driven by the academic profile. University of Pittsburgh is interested in writing, but they have their own special questions they want you to answer. They're not as interested in the main essay. So this is a pretty useful kind of screen here. And you can kind of dig into these schools and get a sense of like what's really going on.
It reminds you that don't count on your your essay getting you into Clemson.
Right, right. And then this section is sometimes required. Clemson's an example of a school that requires it. If the school is under this category, not used, they will not receive it. So there's no spirit of thoroughness for this. You don't get any extra points for filling it out for a school that doesn't want it. But this is where they will ask you to input every class and every grade for every marking period that's on your transcript as it appears on your transcripts. So your transcript shows semesters, just semesters. Full year, just full year. But you do need to do that because Clemson's an example of a school, just like the self-reporting of their of test scores is something that they'll rely on and trust. Clemson is interested in getting applications as early as possible. And so because transcripts won't be ready until later this year, but you could apply to Clemson right now, they'll take your word for it on your grades, admit you, and then when they get their transcript, it better match up. So let's go to the colleges tab, and you can see here the overlooked space often. You know, I finished my Common App, I'm ready to submit. Where do I actually press the submit button? It's under these specific college sections here. And so when I open up Clemson, the questions section is the section for Clemson that goes just to Clemson. The Recommenders and FERPA page, this is really important. You will be asked to release authorization of FERPA. This is your legal right to own all of your educational documents and have a right to view them. You have to waive that right because an example of an educational document that you own is a letter of recommendation, and colleges need to know that you have waived your right to see the letters of recommendation. If you don't waive that right, you can't apply to college. If you do, you can. It's really important. I don't know why this is the case, but when you go through this section, you can't undo it. So make sure you choose, because it asks you, are you willing to waive it or are you not willing to waive it? If you accidentally click, I'm not willing to waive it because you don't understand what you're being asked, and you move forward, you can't undo it. You have to actually call the Common App or it's a big rigmarole. So treat that section carefully. It is simple if you read it and you understand what it's asking, but if you just are clicking through, you can mess yourself up there. And here, after you've completed everything that's required, the review and submit piece, this will turn into where you actually submit. It doesn't look like that now because I haven't completed the application, but it is very straightforward where You click review and submit. You get to actually review a PDF of your common application and the school specific piece. And then it's also where you will pay and then click the actual button submit. And when you've done all that, I don't want to ruin the surprise for you, but it
No,
helps you
don't ruin
celebrate.
the surprise for
All right,
them.
just say it helps you celebrate. That's all I'll say. I'm not going to say what it does. It's cute. I wanted to point out a few anomalies or idiosyncrasies to some of these schools that you might run into. One of them is that what's the school? Villanova does it the right way, I think, where you
I think it's the
have
right way too.
right the questions. I got to waive my FERPA. You only have to waive your FERPA once, and it'll automatically waive it for all the schools you add. And this is where I can submit the Common App, but then they have extra essays. And here you can see what those essays are for this year. And then I have to submit those separately. What a lot of students will do is they will submit the Common App. They have their essay in here already, but they don't press submit down here. And that is really important because if you don't press submit here, you have an incomplete application and you don't even know it. So make sure, and you can tell by all these will have green little checks. The other thing I want to point out is that some schools have supplements, but unlike Villanova, you don't see a separate supplements page because University of Virginia and Tulane is another example. They hide theirs down at the bottom of their questions section. Oh no, that's not where it is. Where is it?
Which one?
UVA.
It's in the
So
questions.
yeah, I put it. It's not under the writing. So that's the writing is about whether you had a felony or not. It's
Right.
not the yeah. But here, when I say I want to apply to American Studies, it asks me a specific arts and sciences, College of Arts and Sciences supplement of 300 words. If I just go by what I see here, like oh Villanova writing supplement, I guess they have a writing supplement. Oh UVA, oh no writing supplement, great. And then I wait till the night before the deadline, and then I start filling out what I think are going to be really simple questions, and I see UVA asks two or three, I can't remember off the top of my head right now, extra essays. Oh, so
And they're legit essays that
yeah,
take like thought and they're asking you complicated things. They give you some choice, but they're real essays. So you need to know they're coming and you can't do it just on the fly the night before.
and then you might run into with a few schools like Tulane an opportunity under activities or maybe some other section to upload a resume. And so this is different from the student activities list, but if you have more detail about activities that don't fit into that 150 words, here's a great place where you can flesh that out. Or if you have more than 10 activities that you want to convey, then here's a way you can do that. So just be mindful that a lot of colleges ask for a resume, and if you're asking yourself, what's a resume? Well, let's talk so you can learn what a resume is and know how to make one that's appropriate for the college admissions process. So we're right at 7:59. We're almost done here. And that was, we just crossed the finish line for the main points we wanted to go through for the Common App. But Katie, I don't know if you've had a chance to do this, but I wonder if we could just like use a minute and roll through some of these questions.
Yes, I was just typing an answer to one that I realized halfway through, I think is one we should answer out loud. We mentioned briefly that earlier this week, the Common App went live for the class of 2021. So one parent said, well, my child started filling out the Common App a few weeks ago. Does he need to restart with the new app? And what will happen is, I'm sure this is true for a lot of students. They don't really give you any indication when you start it in June or July that it's going to go live on August 1st. But typically what happens is when you log in for the first time after the changeover has happened, it'll say, hey, do we want to roll over your information, start your application for the new year? And you will say yes. And then the vast majority of the information that you completed in the Common App section, in the main Common App itself, will roll over. Sometimes there's glitches, but usually it rolls over. But
I wrote this information like 4 or 5 years ago. I've just been rolling it over ever since.
right, exactly. But anything that you put in these school-specific areas will not roll over. Typically, schools do really relaunch their component of the application every year. So I hope that both this woman's or this person's child and anyone else on the call, that you didn't lose anything on the school specific pieces. But the most of the sort of annoying things that you spent all that time typing in will, as Jeff says, mine's is several years old as well. So it will stay and roll over for the new year.
This question here, if it's all right, I'd like to take a first stab at it. How
Yeah.
will the quarantine affect how universities see efforts this summer? It's been hard to find jobs, internships, classes. Everything is canceled or closed, and right? So, I mean, one of the things that you probably realize is that you are not alone. Everyone is going through this, but it might be helpful to know that about a month ago, maybe a little longer now, a large group of admissions deans and vice presidents of enrollment, I think it was more than 200, signed a joint statement that said, that conveyed four points. I'm going to see if I can remember all four. The first was take care of your health. That's important. So do what you got to do to mental and physically stay healthy. The second was we get it. Lacrosse practice is canceled. It's hard to find a part-time job now. Internships are not happening. We understand. The third point was don't underestimate the power of family responsibility. So don't overlook the things that you do, especially now. You're all probably hunkered down together. There are more dishes that have to be cleaned because you're eating in a little bit more often. There's a little bit more stress and anxiety, perhaps. There are more responsibilities that you need to take on as a high school student. And those family responsibilities are significant and useful for college admissions officers to know. If you have no responsibilities at home, well, maybe you ask your parents, "How can I help?" and start taking on some responsibilities. The fourth was service-oriented work, and so they're going to be on the lookout for, assuming that you were healthy, that your parents were able to remain employed, that the worst case scenario was that you were, frustrated and bored and perhaps unsettled, but that you're generally okay. If you had a little extra time because your school went online and everything was closed this summer, how did you use that time? Did you spend most of it with Netflix, or did you think of ways that you could be useful to others, that you could contribute to the lives of others? And if you did, admissions is going to be really interested to know that part of your experience. Well, we're over time, so if we did not get to your question, we apologize, but please, we mean it. Let me switch the screen over to the PowerPoint so you can see our information again. You are welcome to reach out to us. I'm going to skip over our big ideas. We'll go back to that later. Reach out to us at edplanning@prepmatters.com. If you enjoy our town hall webinar series, then come 2 weeks from tonight where our very own Katie Dunn will interview whom, Katie?
Jeff Salingo. So Jeff Salingo is a journalist who is deeply involved in higher education, and he just has a new book coming out in September called "Who Gets In and Why: A Year Inside College Admissions," and he truly did that. He sat at the admissions tables for several really selective and interesting schools throughout the country, and just digs in this book, which I've had a chance to read an early copy of, digs into all the nuts and bolts of how these conversations happen. And I have been doing this for a very long time, and I still learned a great deal from Jeff's book. So I'm excited. I have a lot of questions for him. There's some things I want to know, and I hope that you will join us.
And thank you for joining us tonight. We had a blast. Katie's dog had a blast.
My dogs really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Katie had a blast. So come back every 2 weeks. We're doing, we have this webinar on various subjects. Reach out to us. We wish you well, stay healthy, and best of luck to everyone.
Have a great evening.